Welcome to the documentation training for the Jackson County Department of Social Services. This training was developed by the administration and social workers of the Jackson County Department of Social Services. The presentation is best viewed with the audio on. Please feel free to pause and rewind the presentation in order to review information. Narration will be provided by the following social workers:
Opal Austin,
David Smith,
Megan Cruz. Overview. What exactly is in this training?
what is casework documentation and why is it necessary?
who will see casework documentation?
Why is it important to possess good writing skills?
Keys to good documentation.
General structure.
What needs to be captured?
Investigations and family assessments.
In-home services.
Foster care and adoption.
Get her done.
What is casework documentation and why is it necessary? It's verification of the client's need or lack of need for services. It's verification of the client's progress or ongoing problem areas, and it helps you keep track and anyone reading your documentation of what you've done and what needs to be done. It's an essential requirement by the state for our agency's funding.
Gotta earn that paycheck, baby.
It tracks workers' efforts and activities on agency cases. It guides and supports administrative planning. It establishes a service history for the client. It creates a clear descriptive picture of the events and facts for you and the reader.
Yeah, if I go out on your case, I want to know what I'm getting into. Who will see casework documentation? Other social workers. Supervisors. The program manager. The director. Attorneys. The district attorney. Judges. Law enforcement. Other agencies. State officials. Program auditors.
Why is it important to possess good writing skills?
When you possess good writing skills, you can produce a finished product in a short amount of time.
Mastering basic writing skills and doing it right the first time can save you and your supervisor time and headaches.
This results in high productivity and enhances your value to the agency.
Let them know you are a needed entity within the agency.
The quality of a written product is based on writing skill. The greater the skill, the greater the quality of the product. A large part of your effectiveness as a social worker is based on the quality of your written product. It's a reflection of you and your skills. All of your effort, time, and work are meaningless if the results cannot be clearly and concisely communicated.
Your time is valuable. Make it count.
Poor writing skills may also lead to miscommunication.
Keys to good documentation. If you want your documentation to be effective and coherent to those who may read it, you must remember to use the following 5 key hallmarks in your documentation.
The first hallmark is precision. What does precision mean exactly? Precision is all about presenting accurate and factual data that has been gathered.
The next hallmark is clarity. Your documentation should clearly express the facts of each situation. The reader should be able to draw a clear picture based on what is going on with the family based on your documentation.
Readability is the third hallmark. What you write needs to be easy to read and understand. If your writing is hard to follow, the reader won't be able to get a clear picture of what you accomplished.
The fourth hallmark is brevity. Brevity goes hand in hand with clarity. Brevity is using the least amount of wording possible to convey the message you are trying to get across to your reader. Don't muddle your documentation up with a bunch of opinions and invalid information.
The final hallmark is order. Order is the actual arrangement and sequence of your documentation. Keeping it in chronological order just makes sense, and it makes things easier to find for the reader.
The point is that the reader does not need to know what your client ordered at McDonald's. You're not supposed to write like you text or talk. It needs to be clear for your reader.
And I'm sure that romance novel you're writing in your free time is fantastic, but when it comes to your documentation, stick to the keys.
These are some examples to refer back to of good documentation that uses the 5 hallmarks, as well as some documentation that does not. See if you can tell the difference.
Correct grammar and spelling are essential. Not applying these makes your documentation difficult to read and understand. The case documentation should be kept current to reflect case activity. North Carolina state policy requires your documentation to be typed within 7 days of the activity. It should include all phone calls, visits, or other activities you undertake with or on behalf of the client and/or their family. It should justify the time spent with the client. If you spend 2 hours with a family, make sure that you have more than one sentence describing this.
Documentation should include key action words. Some of the action words I use the most often are observed and provided. It should reflect how you are resolving issues and connecting the family to resources. Focus on what is important to know about the client if someone else was reading the record and had no idea what was going on, or if the case went to court. The language you use should be descriptive and factual. Here is an example in which a social worker described an injury that they observed in a clear, descriptive, and factual way to help paint a picture for the reader.
Always be objective. Do not use subjective comments. Below are some examples for you to refer back to if needed.
Social workers are only as good as their documentation. If you cover every conceivable issue in an interview but don't document them, they never happened.
You spend a lot of valuable time working with clients. You want your documentation to reflect that time you've spent.
Once again, you didn't document it, you didn't do it. General structure.
Use only Calibri font size 12 for ongoing narratives. This will make documentation uniform and easier to read. For each new ongoing contact or activity, refer to yourself as SW last name in the first sentence, and then refer to yourself as SW until the next activity entry. This makes it clear who the social worker was who did the activity. Start a new paragraph for each person interviewed during the interview or meeting being documented. This helps the reader understand who said what. For each new subject matter during an interview with a child, client, or collateral, begin a new paragraph and avoid using long running paragraphs. Again, this makes it easier to read. Be sure to include contact information such as phone numbers for collaterals for future reference. Anytime a new phone number, address, or other contact information is received, it should be noted beside the bolded activity description. An example to refer back to is below. Emails and text messages may either be placed into documentation verbatim by copy and pasting or summarized. This is a judgment call that will be decided based on the content and its importance. Separate, printed copies of emails and text messages do not need to be placed on the record. Below are the approved abbreviations used by our agency. Note that you can put an A in front of many of these abbreviations to indicate that the activity was attempted. An example would be an attempted home visit would be AHV. Keep this page handy to refer back to in the future.
What needs to be captured? Every time you meet with a family, you should be assessing the following information. You should discuss with the family the reasons the department is still involved and their progress. The well-being needs of the children and parents. Interviews with everyone present. Each conversation should be documented. You should provide descriptions of the children and their surroundings.
With nonverbal children, you should document every time you see the child and that you attempted to talk with the child. You should also record information such as any observed interactions with the parents, siblings, or kinship providers, and a brief body inventory.
CMAPS is an acronym referring to critical components of family health and well-being. These components should be assessed and documented during the initial assessment or investigation, and then updated as changes occurred during the life of the case. Completing or discussing the strengths, needs, and risk assessments with the family will help to answer a lot of these questions.
Investigations and family assessments.
The main form used in investigations and family assessments is the DSS 5010. This form should be thoroughly completed because it captures all the essential information for the case. Nothing on the 5010 should be left blank. NA should be used when an item does not apply. Leaving items blank makes it difficult for readers to know if the items were left blank accidentally or if they still need to be addressed. During family assessments, you should clearly indicate in the first paragraph that the entire family was interviewed together, then break down into paragraphs what each member of the family disclosed during the interview process. In-home services.
The in-home face sheet should be completed for each case and placed at the beginning of each documentation section. There's no standardized form like in the 5010 for in-home services documentation. Use a new Word document for each case and be sure to follow the guidelines listed in general structure. The interactive JCDSS in-home family visit narrative form should be used every time a home visit is conducted or the perpetrators are seen. This will be used for all face-to-face visits with the alleged perpetrators, not just home visits. This can be copied and pasted directly into ongoing documentation for the case. For each child and family team meeting, the CFT meeting form should be completed and then copied and pasted directly into the documentation. Other contacts such as telephone calls, school visits, faxes, court hearings, and mail should have the following format. The date, which is bolded and underlined on a line by itself. The activity, which is also bolded on a line by itself directly underneath. The narrative for each activity begins on the next line, but this time unbolded. Multiple activities can be listed under a single date. See the examples below. Foster care and adoption.
Just like in in-home services, there is no standardized form like the 5010 for foster care or adoption documentation. Use a new Word document for each case and be sure you follow the guidelines listed in general structure. You can choose to use a single document for the life of a case or save the documentation for each month separately. There is also no Jackson County form used for each face-to-face with the perpetrator, but it is essential to ensure that the same information is covered. For foster care and adoption, just like in in-home services, each child and family team meeting should be documented using the previously mentioned form. It's located on the share drive. All other contacts, such as telephone calls, school visits, faxes, court hearings, and mail, should be documented in the same way as the in-home documentation format previously discussed and listed below. The DSS 5295 monthly foster care contact record should be completed once each month to document the monthly contacts with the child. The contacts should be documented on this form in addition to within the ongoing documentation for the case. This form can be found at the link provided below.
Get her done.
So now that you know what should be in your documentation and what it should look like, we're going to give a few pointers on how to get it done and turned in when your supervisor wants it. The first thing that I really had to learn as a new foster care social worker was to do documentation as I went. You can see here a section of my documentation that is not yet completed, and I've highlighted the parts that I need to come back to. I type every day as I do things and highlight things that I don't have time to complete so that I can come back to them. Another thing that I've learned is really helpful, for me at least, is using checklists. Here you see one that I developed just to check off and see what I've done for the month and what I still need to get done, and it helps me keep track of everything. And finally, my advice to you as another social worker is to challenge yourself. Don't let documentation beat you. Don't let it get you down. See it as something that you can totally accomplish, something that you can beat. You just have to really stick with it and get it all done.
One of the most important things that you can do to help keep up with your documentation is to use your protective time every morning. One thing that I find very helpful is to do to-do lists. I keep them posted on my desk so I know exactly what I have to do for the week. Having a documentation questionnaire that you can use when working with families and asking questions that you need to know for your documentation is helpful. This is a documentation questionnaire I made up for myself so that I don't forget to ask the important questions that I need to know the answers to. You can use this if you'd like. It's on the share drive, or you can make one of your own.
One of the rules that I live by to make sure that my documentation is done on time is using my shelter time wisely. Not many agencies give their employees that amount of block time to devote to their documentation, so take advantage of it. Another tool that I've implemented into my work habits is making my downtime documentation time. By using 10 or 15 minutes throughout the day, either after a phone call or in between meetings, can add up to extra hours by the end of the week. And finally, set goals with your documentation. Even though you know you have 7 days to document, why wait that long? By setting a goal of trying to document in, say, 24 to 48 hours, not only are the events fresh in your mind, you can also prevent getting stressed out over piles of paperwork.
Schedule documentation time on your calendar and treat it like any other important commitment. Know that casework documentation is a daily responsibility in the profession of social work. Your documentation reflects you and your work. Take it seriously.
Thank you for participating in the Jackson County Department of Social Services documentation training. Please feel free to use this training to refer back to for future reference.